first one is going to be Miguel Paquete from Portugal. He has some records, so we're going to share with you guys. In 2023, he was a competitor for the Portugal World Cup in that year. He also participated in the Leo Regionals in 2024, reaching the top 8 of the tournament. He also made top 32 at EUIC on that same year, 2024 season. And then most recently in the Leo Regional this time around, 2025 season, he ended with a top 64 record. And we have his team sheet on stream for you guys. It's using a composition of Dondozo Tatsugiri, but with some more, let's say, updated picks as the partners. We have the most recent popular core of Sneasler and Indeedee Male, and also a very interesting combination of Ursaluna, Blood Moon, and Talonflame. So it's like a very offensive or hyper offensive type of team where obviously he has the option to just go for raw power with Talonflame or Ursaluna or Indeedee Sneasler, but he also has the Dondozo Tatsugiri combination, which has proved to be really strong in the past 2 years of Scarlet and Violet.
Yeah, I think it's very telling. Every single Pokemon on this team can do a ridiculous amount of damage and is built to do like a lot of it. Dondozo even going with that Order Up variant to be able to boost its attack stat. Indeedee being like the male form, so Expanding Force is just like available on the Pokemon setting Psychic Terrain. There's no like setup support Pokemon setting something else up to go for Expanding Force. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see if and how Miguel is able to find that damage output against the opposing side of the team, because there's some speed control. There's the Unburden from the Sneasler and there's Tailwind from the Talonflame, but there's not a lot of anti-Trick Room support, as we were talking about, which might come into play as we start to show this next player's profile in a little bit. Before we do, anything else you wanted to shout out about this team?
Yeah, that's really important because as you're going to see in a moment, guys, Miguel is going to be facing a Trick Room team. And currently, at least from what we can point here, there's no way to stop Trick Room or disrupt Trick Room from going on. There's no taunt, there's no imprisoned Trick Room, for example, on the Indeedee Male. That is something that sometimes can be there. There's no taunt on the Talonflame either. So that doesn't mean he cannot play against Trick Room. Of course, he probably is aware of how he can approach the Trick Room matchup. There are a lot of strong hitters, as we mentioned, but he's going to be facing an opponent that is using a very, very interesting Trick Room team. We're going to move on into Pai Yu Ping's team sheet in a moment. Torkoal and Delphox with Indeedee, Orthworm, Gallade, and Ursaluna. You guys can see it now on screen. We're also going to talk a little bit about Pai Yu Ping's previous results. He participated in the Taipei Regional in 2021 and he finished top 4 there. Also Taichung Regional top 8 in 2022. He was also top 16 at Taiwan National in 2023 and top 8 at that same event in the 2024 season. So a really strong player from Asia. We have, as I was mentioning, a Trick Room team with Torkoal, Delphox, Indeedee, Orthworm, which is a very interesting pick in this format, Gallade, and Ursaluna. So it's a side spam Trick Room team that does have at least one Pokemon that is fast that can play outside of Trick Room, which is that Delphox with the Expanding Force and in Psychic Terrain combination is holding a choice specs to even do more damage. But then the rest of the team is clearly oriented into a Trick Room approach, right? We have the Torkoal, which is very slow with Eruption and that Terra Fire to do even more damage. We have Indeedee with Gallade to set up Trick Room. Interestingly enough, this Gallade has Trick Room and Protect. It does not have Wide Guard, which is something that sometimes we can expect on Gallade. And then we have this combination that is very interesting, Orthworm and Ursaluna. Ursaluna is obviously a Pokemon that we are very familiar with, but Orthworm hasn't seen that much play in this format, and I'm really interested to see how it can affect this battle specifically, if it even comes to the battle. But what can you tell me about the your point here in this Trick Room team, Hayden?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of really interesting choices that might differ from what you'd expect from the archetype. I think Orthworm is the big one, as you mentioned. It's a really interesting extra risk that I think Miguel has to worry about, that like if you set up Dondozo in the wrong situation and it gets hit by a Clear Smog from that Torkoal, then there might be a bunch of dead turns for this Orthworm to start to come in and set up something like an Iron Defense, set up a Shed Tail, and pass that to something else. I think there's just a lot of danger here if Miguel ever sort of like lets up on the offense. The other interesting thing, as you mentioned, is not having that wide guard on the Gallade, which means that this Ursaluna on the other side of the field is going to be able to have a bit of a field day with the Hyper Voice, hitting neutrally onto most of the Pokemon on the field except for the Orthworm. And I think that, like, sort of those differences, like having this alternative Pokemon, having no wide guard, is going to sort of really change the match, where, like, it gives these players different things to think about as Miguel's trying to figure out the damage. Yeah, so I think we're gonna have to see how that plays out. We're about to be moving into that game 1 in a moment.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We have a hyper offensive, fast team versus a slow and very bulky Trick Room team, as we see the Gallade and Delphox actually making an appear here, and we also see Blob and Ursaluna with the Dondozo on the field now.
So a lot of really powerful offense right off the bat here from Miguel, being able to have that Ursaluna with its sort of safe Hyper Voice into the opposing side of the field. One thing that's interesting is this Delphox coming out, the one sort of sole fast member of Pai's team. And I'm really curious how that pressure winds up affecting Miguel's play here. Like, there's the option to set up Psychic Terrain pretty quickly and go for an Expanding Force or something like that, too.
Yeah, as we are seeing that Dondozo is going to get his partner Tatsugiri on the field in a moment. And we also see Pai switching out the Delphox in turn 1 into what is the Orthworm, which is a really interesting pick here because obviously it walls ground moves from Ursaluna with its I think it's Earth something ability. It's Earth Ether. Yeah. And we do see the Tatsugiri coming in. Dondozo is going to get really powerful with the +2 on all its stats. But keep in mind that Gallade has Sacred Sword, which is a move that can obviously ignore the defense boost from the Dondozo, because Sacred Sword has that specific mechanic. As we do see an Earthquake coming out from that Dondozo, and the Earth Eater is activated here.
Yeah, so a really great opportunity. Ooh, as the Trick Room goes up, so turn 1, Yuping has gotten that Trick Room up in perfect position there. The Dondozo is coming out, so I think it's a good chance to talk through some of the anti-Dondozo techs that exist on Yuping's side of the field. You already shouted out that Sacred Sword. We're going to see it go for a Protect, and I guess we'll sort of see how this Orthworm is playing things out now. It's just going to go for a Shed Tail and try to set up a safe Trick Room position, it looks like.
Yeah, Shed Tail is a move that is really interesting. It allows the Orthworm to switch out, setting up a substitute first, and sharing that substitute with any partner that the player wants to bring in. And most importantly, something that I didn't know at the time was that in order to break the sub, you need to do 25% damage to the Pokemon, but it's going to be based on Orthworm's HP, not the Pokemon. The receiving Pokemon's HP. So that's a mechanic that I didn't know back in the day, and I learned the bad way. But yeah, we do see an Earthquake coming from Dondozo, and it's probably going to break the Torkoal's substitute, of course, because Torkoal is indeed weak to Earthquake. But at least you managed to bring the Torkoal for free, let's say. The substitute is gone, but Torkoal's HP is still at full.
Yeah, that's like the core problem of most Trick Room teams, is how do you get the Torkoal in safely, or whatever your attacker is for the team. And Orthworm's a really interesting way to be able to do that, sort of having the easy switch into a +2 Dondozo's Earthquake, and then to be able to Shed Tail and get the Torkoal in safely after that. We're now going to see the Gallade hop out, not going to go for any Sacred Swords right now, just going back to that Orthworm, and Dondozo's going to go for a Protect, probably trying to dodge that Clear Smog from the Torkoal. So nice proactive as that does indeed go out into that Protect. But this Orthworm's now in position, I think, where there's still a few more turns of Trick Room to get rid of the Dondozo's boosts, and Orthworm in the sun with the water damage reduced, with the immunity to ground, seems like it's in a pretty strong position here.
It is, and Torkoal obviously has a Clear Smog option here. Dondozo is unable to switch out. That's one of the trade-offs you have to take when you're using Dondozo. It cannot switch out, so you basically have to take that Clear Smog that is coming from the Torkoal, and I'm really interested to see what is this Orthworm going to do. It can go for another Shed Tail, as we do see the Shed Tail is trying to position one of its partners to come for free behind the substitute. And this Dondozo is not +2 anymore, as you mentioned. It's in the sun, so the wave crashes are going to do less damage. It doesn't have the +2 attack anymore. Orthworm is obviously immune to ground moves and also resists Order Up. And we do see the switch in here. It's going to be the Gallade coming back to the field, now behind a substitute, and it's able to click Sacred Sword if he wants in the next turn.
Yeah, so finally this Orthworm keeps trying to set up these substitutes to pass to its partners, and it's finally succeeded. There's something with an extra little safe turn here, and the Gallade having a substitute up is a really big deal, because this Gallade now has a little bit of extra protection for in a couple of turns if Trick Room needs to be set up again, since it looks like that's the sole Trick Room setter that's been brought by Yuping's side of the field. And getting that Clear Smog off is just huge, especially in the sun with that Wave Crash being reduced. So things seem to be going pretty well for Yuping positionally, as we see going into this next turn, Torkoal just getting some damage off to that Dondozo, and then Gallade going to be able to follow up after this Dondozo tries to break the substitute of the Gallade. I'm going to go for an order up without the attack boost, still going to finish off that substitute. So Gallade losing its protection, Dondozo slowly trying to build back up that attack set, but Sacred Sword is going to finish it off. And now it's Dondozo down, Tatsugiri out, one more turn of Trick Room. Oh,
yeah, and honestly, that's not bad for Yuping, because Trick Room is probably over at this point, and you still have your strong and fast attackers. You now have a free switch in. You lost Dondozo, but it did its job of styling the Trick Room turns, and now you can position your strong attackers like the Bloodmoon Ursaluna that is next to Tatsugiri, and as we mentioned earlier, this Gallade does not have Wide Guard, so you cannot block the Hyper Voice coming here. You can make a defensive play here by switching into Orthwood, which obviously is a great switch in because it's immune to Earth Power and resists Hyper Voice. However, it's very low health because of the 2 Shed Tails that he went for previously. So it's going to be a tough position for Yuping to overcome here. And as we do see Miguel's Ursaluna going for a Terastallization into the normal type.
Yeah, Miguel seeing an opening and sinking every bit of advantage he can get out of that. So going for that Terra Normal, gonna have a chance for Ursaluna to go for a really powerful attack. First, though, Tatsugiri has to pick what it locks into with that Choice Scarf. Icy Wind, which I think is a really strong choice for the potential of a Delphox coming in later, being able to just reduce that speed. As a Hyper Voice comes out, not gonna KO Gallade this turn, but because Gallade doesn't have Wide Guard, it can only protect itself and not its partner from this Hyper Voice. So that's one Pokemon down from Yuping's side, with an Ursaluna in perfect position to keep doing a lot of damage, and a Tatsugiri in position to provide some speed control so that even if the Delphox comes out, it might not be able to outspeed the Ursaluna after the speed drop.
That is the interesting point here, because I think Ursaluna, if it's modest, it hits 105 speed. If it's timid, it would be, I think it's 104, sorry. So if it's timid, it's going to 114. So if it's modest, it probably won't be able to outspeed the Delphox after the Icy Wind. Tatsugiri, of course, is going to be faster because of the Choice Scarf. But it's going to come down to how fast your Ursaluna is, because once again, I think if it's timid, it might be able to outspeed, but not if it's modest. So we're going to see the Icy Wind because, of course, Tatsugiri is locked into that move. As we do see the Gallade switching on to Torkoal to reset the sun. And remember that this Delphox does have access to Heat Wave. So we do see the Icy Wind coming off. Is your Ursaluna able to outspeed the Delphox? This is the moment of truth. No, it is not faster, able to. That's what I was saying. This is probably a modest Ursaluna, right? So it's not timid to outspeed Delphox.
Yeah, I think that, or maybe, not being able to have that Ursaluna outspeeding is crucial information for Miguel going forwards. It seems like that was kind of the whole game plan for this next round. And so knowing that that's not the case means I think Miguel's going to have to go back to the drawing board going forwards, regardless of the outcome of this match, because that Delphox is such a threat if you can't control the speed order.
Yeah, he probably was not expecting the Delphox to come into this match, right? Like, you see that your team has obviously a lot of fast attackers and your opponent has a Trick Room composition, so you probably expect they're going to bring their slow, bulky mons. But that's a really great pick from Yuping to bring a Delphox, knowing that Trick Room is probably not going to be able to do all the job, so you do want to have something out of Trick Room to do damage. But this is not over. Talonflame is here. Tatsugiri, unfortunately, is unable to switch out moves to maybe do something else into these 2 fire type attackers, and Tatsugiri being a water type, but it's locked into a nice move. So Talonflame is currently against the world, basically. As we do see a Terastallization, we didn't see a Terastallization from Yuping's side, so it's going to be the Torkoal, which is going to go for a Terra Fire just to dish out as much damage as possible with its fire boosted. Now, weatherable probably, because Torkoal's eruption is probably not going to be necessarily a great pick given how low health Torkoal is. And Talonflame misses the dual Wing Beat. That's really bad for Miguel.
Poor Talonflame, it's alone versus the world next to Tatsugiri with its little icy winds, and it can't even hit the dual wing beat. So that's going to be a whole lot of sun-boosted fire-type attacks going into this poor Talonflame. The Choice Specs boosted Delphox Flamethrower, and the Terrafire boosted, Charcoal boosted, Sun boosted, Weather Ball from the Torkoal into that Talonflame, going to finish it off. And poor little Tatsugiri probably not particularly happy to face down a bunch of fire types locked into its little 55 base power ice-type attack here.
Yeah, that's really sad for Tatsugiri. You're a water type, but you cannot do any damage to these fire types because you decided to lock into Icy Wind. And honestly, that was a hard commitment for Miguel's because he was probably expecting to outspeed the Delphox after the Icy Wind. But, you know, as I was saying, it's going to come down to how fast you train your Ursaluna. Because the team has Tailwind in the Talonflame, I imagine a lot of players just prefer to be, let's say, stronger with Ursaluna by picking a Modest Nature because you outspeed almost everything with Tailwind. If you have a max speed Modest Ursaluna, Ursaluna is usually a Pokemon that we used to see more on Trick Room compositions, but in this format specifically, because of the lack of like super strong special attackers, a lot of players have opted to just run in max speed and just pair it with any kind of speed control option. Tailwind, for example, from Whimsicott, or in this case, from Talonflame. So it was a really interesting match for sure. I think the Delphox pick was really crucial for Yuping because without it, it was going to be really tough to beat this other team outside of Trick Room.
Yeah, I think I really thought that Yuping was going to be in trouble with the way that Trick Room ended as the Dondozo went down. I was really worried. I thought maybe Yuping was going to need to be having Trick Room up to get through the team. But it seems like Yuping picked a totally different route through the game that worked great, just sort of like calling the bluff of like, well, the Ursaluna is going to be modest, and I don't have to worry so much about the Icy Wind maybe. Like, having that fast mode as an option from the Delphox was really just, it won Yuping the game, and I think that's a really interesting thing for Miguel to now have to think about for the next few games, is you can't just assume Trick Room's going to go up and plan around that. Maybe you'll spend all your resources stalling Trick Room, and then Delphox will come to finish off your Pokemon.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I was doing the math, honestly, just like what I was hearing you talking, and I don't even think Timid Ursaluna after Icy Wind outspeeds Delphox. Delphox is a Pokemon that is super speedy for, you know, this format. I would have to double check that, but I have now that feeling that maybe is not even enough with Timid Nature. But we're gonna see if you know, Miguel decides to bring once again the Ursaluna with that Icy Wind option for Tatsugiri, or if he decides to just completely change his approach for this game 2, which we already have ready for you guys, and we're gonna jump into that game 2 in a moment. And we're, you know, just really interested to see if there's any adaptation. We do see an adaptation. There is indeed this time around from Yuping immediately into the field with Delphox, just trying to, you know, set up the Delphox in the psychic terrain to do as much damage as possible from with expanding forces maybe. And also, of course, you do have the option to go for Follow Me to protect it if you really need it. And this indeed, as usual on psychic spam teams, does have the option to go for Helping Hand if he wants to.
Yeah, I really like this play from Yuping, or at least this choice of a lead. Being able to set up the Psychic Terrain and just sort of double down on Delphox, which was the most effective piece of his strategy in the previous turn. Having that redirection option, having that Helping Hand option, all of it plays really well. And it's especially insightful because Miguel has brought a Pokemon that's particularly weak to Psychic in that Sneasler. It's possible that we'll see a Terrestrialization come out from it now to be immune to that Expanding Force, but that's still one less defensive resource Miguel will have for the rest of the game if he uses it now. And so getting that out of the way before Trick Room even goes up is a really strong option from Yuping, I think. So just a lot of pressure here that the onus is on Miguel to respond to.
Yeah, and we also saw the Sneasler, as you said, in this game too, which is not a Pokemon I think we saw in the previous game. And we do see a switching immediately, just bluffing that like Delphox is probably going to attack, trying to probably anticipate to any potential defensive play from the opponent, and bringing the Torkoal immediately. This probably means indeed he's going to try to go for a Trick Room, and he wanted to position the Trick Room you know, sweeper immediately with that hard switch in, as we do see a Sneasler going for a Terra Dark, trying to do as much damage as possible with the Toe Chop into this Psychic type Indeedee. And I think this should be a knockout, but actually no, we do see a close combat, not a Throat Chop into the Indeedee, close combat into the Delphox, and now, as I was mentioning, Indeedee does get the Trick Room, and Torkoal doesn't come for free because it did take 50%, but it's in Trick Room, which is what Torkoal usually likes to be in.
Yeah, pretty crucial call from Miguel there, I think. If you don't get any damage into the Torkoal here, then this game is very close to over. But stopping that eruption as an option, this Torkoal can still do a lot of damage with Weather Ball, but that's all single target. And with the Indeedee being the main Pokemon on the field, it can't really... Like, it can do a little bit of damage to the other Pokemon with Dazzling Gleam, but not a ton. So I think really crucial for Miguel to have landed at least that much damage. But having burned the Terrestrialization is, I think, going to be pretty crucial going forwards, because it didn't need to Terra, it didn't take any psychic damage, but it still sort of had to be safe in that previous turn.
Yeah, and both Torkoal and Sneasler decided to go for Protect this turn. This was a very important turn because Dondozo did Protect the last turn, so there is a chance you want to bring the Tattoo Gear immediately. So if you are Yuping, you could clear Smog Dondozo trying to predict that switch in just to get immediately the drops, the boost, sorry, away. But Dondozo just deciding to stay in as a regular form, going for an Earthquake, doing a little bit of damage to the Indeedee, not too much. Torkoal obviously didn't take any damage because he decided to Protect. It's a defensive play, trying to scout a little bit. Okay, what is your approach here? Are you going to bring the Tatsugiri now? Are you going to do something else? But, you know, Trick Room is still up, but that's one less turn of Trick Room. Your Indeedee didn't do much. Indeedee is not a Pokemon that is, you know, usually known for doing a lot of damage. It's just a supporter. Dazzling Gleam was just tickling the Dozo, and we do have now the option to see what the next move from Miguel is. Are you going to bring a Tatsugiri here? Are you going to just stay in as a regular Dozo and like just spread attacks with your two physical attackers here? And Torkoal, of course, if the Dozo is not boosted, you cannot do much to it. Yeah, you can go for a Clear Smog, but that's going to do not too much damage. And, like, of course, Dozo resist fire moves. So this is a very interesting turn because you don't want to keep wasting your Trick Room turns, although you do have a Delphox, which your opponent already knows is in the back for after Trick Room ends. Let's see what the Torkoal goes for. It's a Weather Ball into this Sneasler. That is enough to pick up the one-hit KO into that Pokemon.
So the Sneasler, having Terrestrialized completely in vain, it protected itself from an attack that didn't come out, and the Weather Ball was still a one-hit KO. So this Torkoal is still putting in some work, but as you mentioned, Dazzling Gleam, Indeedee can at most tickle this Dondozo, as it's going to be able to get an Earthquake off without the boosts, but still enough to take Torkoal down pretty low and in range of another KO. I think crucially, we're now 3 turns through Trick Room, and Neil has lost his Terrestrialization and has lost a Pokemon, but there's only a little bit of Trick Room left to go, and Miguel, we can see his side. He has a Tatsugiri in the back, and as soon as this Torkoal is down, as soon as Trick Room's up, this Dondozo is going to be kind of clear to go and do a lot of damage through Yuping's side of the field.
Yes, and we do see both Indeedees, the female and the male, facing each other, something that you usually don't see that often, but it's interesting to me how this male Indeedee has become super popular in this metagame lately. And as you mentioned, we can see Miguel's side of the of the battle, and he does have that Tatsugiri in the back, just waiting for its time to come. Just staying as a regular Dondozo would have it to, bring the Tatsugiri earlier than needed. It's really important because you cannot just let the Dozo lose its boots anymore as you did in the game 1. So I like that play from Miguel, just delaying the Tatsugiri switch in. As we do see the Torkoal, this is probably one of the few opportunities Torkoal is going to have to Terrestrialize and do as much damage as possible. We do see a Fire, Terra, Sun boosted, Charcoal boosted Weather Ball into the Dozo, which, even though it's resisted, does a lot of damage. I'm really surprised with that damage. And Dazzling Gleam, is it enough? Dondozo survives with 3 HP. That's literally 3 HP. That's all Dondozo needs to get rid of the Torkoal. And keep in mind that even though Dondozo is low health, it's going to recover some HP with the leftovers, and most importantly, it's still there. Even though it's low health, sometimes you don't need Dondozo to be healthy, you just need it alive so you can get that one last damage that you need once your Tatsugiri comes into the field.
Wow, that Dondozo is just perfectly trained for this situation. You were mentioning earlier that Torkoal can't do that much to the Dondozo. It really tried to prove you wrong this turn, but it wasn't able to. And I think well, but it still couldn't. You were kind of right. Like, the Dondozo was bulking it. The Torkoal was trying to prove you wrong, but the Dondozo knew that it needed to prove Paul right. And I think Miguel's happy about that. Because, as you mentioned, like, all Dondozo needs to have to do damage to knock out the rest of the team is at least 1 hit point. And we're, I think, into the last turn of Trick Room now. Hopefully Miguel going to check just now for us.
Yeah, it is the last turn of Trick Room.
As soon as that Trick Room goes down, and Dondozo has Protect to make sure that happens, he's going to be in pretty prime position. Of course, there's, I guess, a bit of a mind game here because there's 2 Trick Roomers on the other side of the field, so double Protect isn't safe, exactly.
Isn't safe? Like, do you call the double Trick Room and attack with Dozo, or do you just Protect and let them go for a double Trick Room. Is Yuping gonna call this and go for the double Trick Room? This is probably the decisive turn here, because if you double Trick Room, you can still... There is a Trick Room from Indeedee. Yeah, the double Trick Room. Gallade is gonna go for another Trick Room. That's a perfect play from Yuping. Just knowing that the opponent probably wants to protect for that one last turn of the Trick Room to completely be outside of the Trick Room and just have the Tatsugiri switch in, for example, and just let Dondozo do as much damage as possible, or just attack with Indeedee. But no, Yuping was aware of that possibility. He went for a double Trick Room, resetting the Trick Room for 4 more turns now, and Dondozo, it's alive, is recovering health, but now it has to face a Gallade that obviously can do a lot of damage to both of these Pokemon. Indeedee male from Miguel's side of the field lost its Focus Sash, so Indeedee is usually a Pokemon that the male version, at least, it doesn't have a lot of bulk, so it's gonna go down from a Sacred Sword easily from this sharpness boosted Gallade.
Yeah, the other Indeedee just going to make sure that Gallade gets off as much sharpness boosted attacks as possible. Going to redirect that Wave Crash, pretty important now that the sun is gone, so it's going to finish off the Indeedee. But Gallade should be free and clear to be able to go off for an attack in just a moment here, as Dondozo is damaged by the recoil from Wave Crash, and Sacred Sword's going to finish off that Dondozo, leaving poor solo Choice Scarf Tatsugiri in the back in 4 more turns of Trick Room. As Indeedee goes for Dazzling Gleam, that's good damage, but not enough to really change the outcome of this match here. That was such an incredible play, getting the double Trick Room at exactly that moment. And we're going to be able to see in a moment how that plays out, as indeed Tatsugiri hits the field with his Choice Scarf, helpfully making sure that it moves last during the Trick Room.
Yeah, there's no Terastallization option either for Miguel, because he already committed into his Terra. And as you said, this Choice Scarf Tatsugiri is in Trick Room, unable to protect. Gallade Sacred Sword is enough to just pick up the clean one-hit KO into it, and this Indeedee cannot do much to a Psychic type and Fire type like Delphox. Even if you somehow get a critical hit here on the Gallade, you cannot touch Delphox that much, so Delphox is just able to completely just be in front of this Indeedee without caring about anything. As we see